Alright, I'm gonna real quick go ahead and start off with a little snippet that I thought was one, very interesting, and two, what got me into thinking about this topic in the first place.
There are multiple examples of modern concrete structures that have crumbled after just a few decades, yet some of the most remarkable Roman buildings still stand nearly 2,000 years later. But how? The answer almost sounds like magic. They used self-healing concrete. MIT researchers worked to solve this mystery for years, and when they finally figured it out, they realized something incredible. What seemed like low-quality mixing of the concrete turned out to be very intentional and actually the key to its incredible lifespan. Because Roman engineers weren't just creating regular concrete, they combined volcanic ash, volcanic tephra, sand, quicklime, and water. But the materials used weren't the only unconventional part of the process. They mixed the concrete under high temperatures, a method called hot mixing. Water is the most common cause of weaknesses in regular concrete, but the Roman mixture didn't just resist water, it reacted with it. When cracks formed and moisture seeped in, chunks of lime inside the concrete dissolved and triggered a chemical reaction, creating a calcium-saturated solution that flowed into the cracks, essentially gluing the structure back together. When MIT researchers recreated the Roman concrete, they caused damage to the structure and added water to the cracks. The results were astonishing. The cracks completely healed all by themselves within only 2 weeks. This allowed Romans to break free from basic stone and brick structures, unlocking architectural design that seemed impossible for the time, like the Pantheon, which is still the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. A building so advanced, modern engineers still study it today. The same self-healing concrete was used in Rome's vast aqueduct system, carrying something as essential as water over 400 kilometers across complicated terrain.
Alright, now with that out of the way, and apologies as well if I sound a little ill, but otherwise, I'd like to at least try and talk about this while I still can, because this, to me, is one of, if not probably, the most interesting things of modern day. Why are we not using this anymore and going into the what I would consider as more profitability of bringing in concrete and building stuff and requiring a whole bunch of other things without really ever thinking about just how bad that the, I would say, just structural damage usually could be, especially with everything else in Europe that has stood essentially the test of time, like they already mentioned in there, the Pantheon and the aqueducts that traversed a whole bunch of water, and just in general, a lot of the main things that we thought we would have still kept going with, but somehow got completely and utterly taken astray almost entirely because of new building, what do you call it, the building, like, structural, I hate that I'm forgetting the word, but pretty much just the stuff that really has changed over the course of however many years, from, like, for example, in 2000, with how all of what was necessary for a house was completely different than what we have as a whole thing for the house today. It completely has changed the way the electrical circuits and everything can be either easily optimized or somehow completely unoptimized for some ungodly reason. And same thing with concrete. Same thing with just purely building a house or a castle or anything of the sort. A lot of what was used way back in the day just now isn't used anymore. You see with everything, especially in the United States, Canada, anywhere in potentially any third world country. And there's some third world countries I'm sure that have used this. I just currently don't know which ones, other than, like, I could at least say Asian countries most likely, just because they've mostly been alive pretty much in a similar vein to the Europeans, but the Europeans pretty much actually got a lot of that stuff essentially figured out for the most part, until something happened and something changed and we decided, oh, that was not really what we should be doing. But the solution was right there, nearly hundreds of years ago, if not thousands, like over 1,000 years ago at this point. A couple thousand, pretty much, considering that Rome, of course, was this huge, what you already understand in history as like the largest empire, and people are having a whole bunch of correlations to today. I get it, but this isn't the point. The point is they did all of this and had all of these different, what wasn't really considered technology, but more of what infrastructure that they have done, is they had to adapt because they didn't understand or even have the tools that we have now to essentially do what they could have done in 10 times the amount of time that they could do at that point in time. Sure, it would take maybe a good few days, most likely, or it could take a good several hours. But because we have all these things now to be able to heat something within the span of a few seconds, we somehow don't utilize it. It just boggles my mind. And of course, it sounds like a whole huge rant, but just mainly how they managed to get so much of this shit standing to the test of time with self-healing concrete, and even just from paved roads to infrastructure for buildings to foundation even. Like, that's probably the biggest one, is we could have done foundation on stuff like this. And literally, it would have been really, really good to have just set that all up, and we would have been pretty much set for a long while. Because everyone knows there's hurricanes and wind and structural damage and flooding and all of this stuff. You can easily get some of the stuff like this to be prepared, because water damage is the biggest factor in everything. So we'd be able to easily get rid of a lot of what's going on there simply by using this as material. But for whatever reason, we decided to change that out a good several hundred years ago. Somewhere down the line, we ended up saying that's not a good idea. Let's go to this instead because it's cheaper, it's faster, and whatever they decided to think. That I don't know. All I saw was this portion, and I was like, there's no way that we somehow had this entirely within our grasp for who knows how long, and we never bothered to continue bringing this back. I don't know. It's just something that boggles my mind. We could literally be using stuff like this, but because of the way everything works now, you can't exactly go and do these things on your own unless you essentially are given permission by, whether it's a local government or the federal government or wherever, to be able to build on your own property to use this kind of material. And the highly likelihood of them saying yes or no, depending on where they stand on it, is usually going to be a likely hard no, depending on who genuinely understands that, let alone getting any sort of opportunity for getting those materials. But that's really it. Just something short, at least from seeing this. I just thought this was relatively interesting and something that people should kind of start looking at more. And if ever anyone decides to go and build their own place or just find some land or somewhere to just chill at, please, for anyone within the United States or anywhere in some country that has the ability to get this kind of material, we should be using this more, whether it's for pavement, for like sidewalks, for whatever, just to essentially keep the infrastructure alive and just more somewhat maintained than how all the other like cheap and very weak set of infrastructure that we have now. We need to be using more of this. But that's really it for me. I just thought I'd at least say something, talk about this, because this has been on my mind for a while. I just thought it would be a very interesting thing to just talk about. So that's really it for me. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.